There's two other things I want to unpack actually from the creature from Jekyll Island because there's so much in there that is I think has really screwed up this conversation. The first one is the private versus public nature of the Federal Reserve, and the second one is fractional reserve banking and the implications thereof. So the creature from Jekyll Island basically puts forth this idea. These secret bankers met on Jekyll Island, created this Federal Reserve, and they said, we're going to own it, but nobody's going to know who we are. And so we're going to create the money for the country, charge interest for that money creation, and that interest paid is going to go to us so we could suck up through this mechanism the productive power of the country. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a group of people sucking up the productive power of the country, but they're definitely not doing it in this way. If you just bother to read the Federal Reserve Act, this is what blew my mind. Right? It's like I assumed that maybe G. Edward Griffin did a little bit of reading of the Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve Act is very, very clear who the, in quotes, I can't remember if it says members or stockholders or shareholders, one of those, whatever term it's using, that's using kind of this private corporate language. They have no control over the Federal Reserve. They get a very, very minimal amount of money, and who they are is completely public. They are 100% completely public. There's no like who are the members of the Federal Reserve or who are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve.
Well, yeah,
no, it's completely public.
And there's people who think that the Queen of England is somehow, or King
Right.
of England is somehow the secret owner of the Federal Reserve. Whether or not that's the case, what does it matter? Where does so if that's a problem in your mind, where do you fix it? Where do you see the king meddling, and then you can go there and say, haha, I got you, king. But that's not really the case, right?
It's not the case at all. The reality is, and I made a complete video going over the important points of the Federal Reserve Act and breaking this down to show that the private banking influence over the Federal Reserve System, because the Federal Reserve System starts at the top. There's the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. They're the ones that they have to work within the framework of the Federal Reserve Act, but they make the policy for all the individual 13 Federal Reserve banks. Now, each of the individual Federal Reserve banks have their own boards, and they can make policy for their own individual banks as long as it's in line with the Federal Reserve Act and what the top board says. Now, in terms of where the private banks have influence, first of all, at the top board, it's zero. There's like 5, 7, 9 members. I can't remember off the top of my head. The president appoints, and I think it's just the Senate. I want to say it's just the Senate. The Senate confirms all 7 members, and then the chairman and the vice chairman are selected from there. So there's nothing private at all whatsoever to do with that top level. At the individual 13 levels, there are 3 types of people who sit on the board. There's a Class A, a Class B, and a Class C. Class A is chosen by the top board of governors, so that's 100% government. Classes B and C, I might have B and C backwards, but I believe B is the member banks of that individual regional Federal Reserve Bank. They elect board members from the banking institutions to sit on that board. There's your first private. And then the third is C, which is I can't remember who chooses them, but they're people from the community that specifically have nothing to do with, they can't be an officer, they can't be an owner, they can't be a president, they can't have anything to do with the banking system. They need to represent agriculture or labor or industry or something like that. They sit on these lower boards, and when it comes to the decision-making process that these lower boards are able to do, half the time, the Class B, which is the ones selected by the banking system, they don't get to vote. I mean, like the level of cascading down that you have to go before any influence whatsoever is exerted by the actual banking system is minuscule. And to the point that you were making, like, okay, let's say that the King of England is one of these members. What does that mean? In terms of what these members are paid, yes, the Federal Reserve is set up like the Federal Reserve System is set up like a corporation. They got profits and P&Ls and profit and loss sheets and balance sheets and all this sort of stuff. And they talk everything about, here's our interest, here's our profit, here's our losses, that sort of stuff. But when they get all their, in quotes, profits, 2% of those profits get sent out to the member banks. And Nemo, where does another 98% of those profits go?
To the Treasury.
To the U.S. Treasury. Okay, so this whole thing about there's this secret cabal of bankers and we don't know who they are and they're sucking up all the profits over having monopoly over the money creation. It's just so blatantly, stupidly false. You can figure it out by reading the Federal Reserve Act. And you know the goalpost response that I get to that now, Nima? I don't know if you've seen this. Oh, you think the Federal Reserve Act is the way that they're actually doing things? You just believe what the government tells you on a government website? Like, obviously, people who have never, ever interacted with a bureaucrat before. Bureaucrats are obsessed with the rules.
Yeah. I mean, there's on this question of whether or not the Fed is public or private, I kind of hate it so much because it's such an esoteric and theoretical conversation. But yeah, back in the day when I still had my blog, I wrote down, and by the way, I noticed the other day my blog has been taken over by, or my old domain has been taken over by some other, I don't know, demon website or something.
Yeah.
So, like a Diablo website or whatever. I don't know. But because I just didn't really care about the domain anymore. Anyway.
Oh yeah. Cool dragon. China cheap flying jersey store.com.
But maybe I should write this up or look it up in the archive. Maybe it's somewhere in the archive still. It probably is in the archive.
Yeah.
Because all these points of whether Fed. Okay, so there's like 10 points I made of aspects or characteristics of the Fed, and you tell me if you can show me a private company where this is the case, then I will hear your argument that the Fed is private. But these things are, okay, the board is elected by Congress. Can you show me another private corporation where the board is elected by Congress? The chairman is appointed by the president. Can you show me another private corporation where the chairman is elected by the Congress? The currency is, by the way, issued by the Treasury, the hard currency, and the Fed buys it from the Treasury. So can you show me a business where all the hard products it buys and sells come from the federal government and the government alone? No, of course. The Federal Reserve's profit, 99% of the Fed's profits go to the Treasury. Can you show me another private corporation that takes zero profits, sends all the profits to the federal government? And there's several other points.
It's not all. It's 98%, Nima.
It's so blatantly obvious, in my opinion, that this is a government institution. It should be treated as such. If you want to solve problems with it, then you have to treat it as such and approach it from that public sector angle.